Welcome, folks, to the Mimer, the Hasidic discourse. We continue. So, something that needs great understanding is that Yitzchak, Isaac, when he became elderly and wanted to bless his children, or in particular, his firstborn, actually, we shouldn't even say children, his firstborn, he wanted to bless, which was Esav, even though Esav was not someone who God's name was, constantly on his lips. He wasn't saying Baruch Hashem. He wasn't saying Yimir Hashem. He wasn't saying, thank God, with God's help. He didn't have God as something, that was part of his, shall we say, his headspace. I guess his headspace, good word, right? Which then, why would he want to bless him? He's not really, he's not the viable choice, seemingly, to be the one who gets the blessings, who will be the continuation of Yitzchak, right? To be his continuation, to be the progenitor of the Jewish people. So what is it? Because Yitzchak saw in Esav that he has very lofty and high holy sparks in him. He saw, in others, he saw the potential in him. He had great potential. Therefore, he wanted to bless him. Why? Because we learned, if you recall, in the last discourse, that a blessing, Baruch, means to draw down. In other words, a blessing is to draw down that which is the potential for us in the heavens above, from the heavens above, and draw down into this world. In other words, a blessing is the idea of something that is, excuse the phrase, in our lucky stars, not a, I wouldn't call that a Jewish term, at all. But, sort of to give a frame of reference in the modern day vernacular, if you will, or maybe I don't know, so modern day, but something that's potentially there, and it just needs to be realized down here. So Yitzhak, being a righteous person, holy person, saw that in Esav, that there was this holy spark within his soul, and by blessing him, he would draw down from that great supernal light, divine light, and through the blessing, it would be refining that spark in him. Right. In other words, Yitzchak, because of his greatness, his holiness, he would be able to elicit that light from above in a refined manner, is that light should be able to come down here and refine him. Right? Not all light is necessarily refined. Sometimes light is too strong. The light of the sun, you look at it, sometimes it's too strong and it's blinding. For I'm just giving that as a metaphor to bring out this idea. Okay. Sometimes that's what happens with, or sometimes, you light up a place that, you know, isn't ready to be lit up. Right? Sometimes you shed the truth to somebody, and they're not ready to hear the truth. How often does that happen? It can even happen to us. That can even happen. It does happen to us. Someone shares something with us, and there's a truth there. May not be the entire truth. That's whatever. There's a truth there, and we're not ready to hear it. So we, rationalize, justify, so on and so forth. So what Yitzchak wanted to do is to bring this divine light, draw it down, right? Being that it's his blessing from this holy person, and then bring it in a refined manner that would refine him. Again, by way of metaphor, just think about it. Yitzchak, what he wanted to do is shed an awesome truth, an awesome truth to Esav. I'm giving this metaphor. This is not what it means. It means to give him the blessing, but right, but this awesome truth that would allow Esav to be refined because of this truth, right? It would, you know, make him a different person, if you will. But what would have happened is that this light, this supernal, awesome light, very powerful light, would have happened in two ways. Either it would have been completely lost in him, or it would completely um, nullify his being. So again, I'm giving this by way of metaphor, right? Sometimes when you tell the truth to somebody, that's why you have to be careful. I did this yesterday and I made a mistake. I made a mistake. I said the truth to somebody. Actually, at one point it got just swallowed up in them and lost. And then actually it destroyed them. And actually it was wrong of me. Just destroyed them. In that moment, that truth destroyed them. It was too much for them to handle. Even though I said it very gently, it wasn't, said it very, you know, wasn't wasn't even about just wasn't even about them, but someone else they were dealing with and saying a truth that would actually help them to better handle how they were dealing with that person, right? So it's just trying to help them, but they weren't ready to hear that. They just, they're in victim mode, and in victim mode, any truth that you try to give first got swallowed up by them in a sense that it's just like, didn't affect them. And then secondly, actually destroyed them because it gave them tried to give an opportunity that they wouldn't have to be a victim to the circumstances they were dealing with somebody. Guess what? It didn't work. They weren't ready. They weren't ready to hear something that would empower them and not make them a victim. No, yeah, I only did this, for their benefit, but I miscalculated. I'm giving that by way of metaphor for you to appreciate and understand this idea over here. Yitzchak wants to bless, right? Right. He wants to bless because there's a great potential, wants to draw down this great light through his blessing to his son Esav in order to, knowing that he ain't, he ain't, this holy dude. He's not this special person. He ain't acting that way. God's name is not a part. God consciousness is not a part of him. But he felt that through a blessing, he'd be able to draw down from that supernal light. It wouldn't have worked. Why wouldn't it have worked? Why wouldn't it have worked? Is because the refinement of Esav has to come through Yaakov, not Yitzchak. Has to come from Yaakov, from Jacob. Dafka, specifically, indeed. North Coast Patty. It may help them to contemplate the truth. Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes we have to hear the truth, right, before we're willing to listen. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and maybe divinely orchestrated, that I said what I said. And I mean, in the end, it is divinely orchestrated, the consequence of it. And hopefully that person will learn something. Yeah. And I'm using that as what divine providence. I wow. It just always happens. Things in my life. See it in the mimer. And I hope you see in your life the things that we learn. How powerful is that? So, for whatever reason, and um, well, certainly it's going to go through over here. right. And for whatever reason, the birur, right? So, you know, um, just to so sometimes the message, just to give this by way of metaphor, right? The message that I shared, um, sometimes it needs to come through another person. That message, you're not the messenger. Sometimes it needs another person to be that messenger, right? For for whatever reason, because of the dynamic that there is between the two people, right? And sometimes the messenger will be somebody else who will be able to say those words, either because they said it more in a different way or because the dynamic between them is such. As actually, I had the same experience with that too. The exact same experience. Is that something that we were dealing with in the Chabad house here? And I know if I was the one to present it, it wouldn't be the best because of the dynamic. So I told somebody else, you present it. I thought it would be better. And you know what? It worked. That person presented it, right? And oh, everybody was hands on. Right? Sometimes that's the way it needs to go, right? So the birur, the refinement of Esav has to come through Yaakov. Therefore, God, this is like beyond like unbelievable. So God, he orchestrated everything because Esav's blessing has to come to Yaakov in a, and it was a way of trickery that as if he's Yaakov, right? So he's, you know, got fur on him, so he'd be hairy. Remember, Yitzchak was blind at the time, so he couldn't see, but he felt him, and he felt like he was Esav. He has to get Esav's blessing, Yaakov. Why? Because by getting it, he's able to refine Esav. He's got the power. It's vested in him. And as a result of having that power, he can now refine and transform, which we're not going into here, right? Right. But that's the storyline. Therefore, there's a whole, God, you know, kind of, I don't know, from the back door, if you will, right? In a manner of trickery, right? That he is presenting himself as Esav to get the blessings of Esav from the dew of heaven, from the fat of the land, that has to be to Yaakov. Because if he doesn't get that blessing, how is he to refine and to transform Esav? He needs that power. Who understood that was Rivka. Just as Sarah understood who is the continuation is not Ishmael, but only Yitzchak is the progenitor of the Jewish people. Rivka understood, right, that it has to come to Yaakov, the blessing, because he will be the continuum of the Jewish people and not Esav. And it has to be in specifically in this way of where he is like Esav in order to have that power that he could then indeed refine and transform Esav. Now that itself is a journey that we're actually still on, which is anyway. Whoa. Unreal. Unreal.